Thank you, Raymond, and welcome to all participants today. What I'd like to do is spend some time and go through how our results have been for 2019, and then think a bit about how we've been performing for 2020 and what we're doing to manage some of the challenges that we have in the organisation as well as across Papua New Guinea. When we look at 2020 at the start of the year, it certainly wasn't the year that we expected. In 2020 at the start, we had very high hopes, very positive views on both PNG and how the performance of the fund was going to be. So I'll spend a bit of time around what's occurred during 2020. I'd also like to think a bit about how 2019 has performed and to give you the opportunity to think back as to 2019 and what occurred. Typically, this meeting is held in the earlier parts of the year where 2019 is quite relevant. And probably part of what we really want to spend some time on is what's happening in 2020 and how we can talk to you about what we think will be lower returns in 2020. It's certainly a year where we have challenges across Papua New Guinea, but also challenges for the fund and how we're looking to address those and what we're doing to support our members. The fund is owned by the members. It's not owned by me. It's not owned by the board. We think about our members. It's in the members' best interest that we run the fund. And what I want to try and pass across to you is those messages that we're doing our best to deliver for our members, and that's constantly in our mind. When we look at 2020 and think about not the year that we had planned, when we started the year, we heard about a virus in China. But also for us, it was a very exciting time because we're actually looking at how we're relaunching the brand. Often people talk to us about our old name, POSF, and what we've been trying to do is actually drive forward and for people to understand that Nambawan Super, and it's a different organisation. It's different in the way that we manage, it's different in the way that we look after our members, and it's certainly important that we actually get that message across to our members, and part of doing that has been the branch launch, and part of today's we'll talk to you a bit about how that branch launch has been. But as we started that early part of the year, it wasn't known to us that we would have this COVID-19 and how it would actually spread across the world. And whilst we here in Papua New Guinea have been fortunate that we've only had very minor numbers of cases, we are not just an island, but we are part of a global investment. And part of what happens around the world impacts into us. As well as that, some of the steps and some of the actions that were taken in the best interest of the country and the best interest of members has certainly hurt some of the returns to our members. But what it's important is that what we've tried to do is look at how we balance that health of both our membership as well as what we're trying to do to deliver the service that we want to do for our members. And we'll talk a bit about what's occurred in there. We think back to April, which doesn't seem that long ago, we had our first lockdown. And part of what we were doing there was to think around how we could focus on health. And we took steps to talk to our members about health and safety. As well as that, it meant that there was a lot of restrictions about gatherings. Typically, this meeting is held in April. And what we looked at that time is that we weren't to have meetings, so meetings were very limited. We postponed that. As COVID continued through, we saw that some of the controls had been working. But also one of the important things that had occurred in that period of time was that we actually had a handover of our chairmanship. Part of the fund is to make sure that we abide by regulations. And those regulations limit the time that a director can be on the board, and they also limit the time that a person can be a chairman. So in May we farewelled Chairman Smari, and we welcomed Chairman Managi into the role of driving the particular fund. But also during that time we often saw across the country very challenging times for people. With that lockdown, many people weren't earning an income, many people have challenges around food shortages, and things like that. So we need to also remember that there have been certainly impacts across the social areas as well as the investment areas, and some of these impact into our members. In June, we started to look at how can we actually look at assisting members with financial literacy. Part of what our role is to try to educate our membership around superannuation and what they can do to save and how they can look to get out of what we would call a debt trap. How can they actually enjoy life without having to have burdens put on them? So part of that financial literacy has started to be rolled out across the organisation and into the membership. But we also had to think about how can we do that differently. And we've done that differently through utilisation of virtual, as well as doing it in a COVID-safe environment. Coming into July, we had a second lockdown. We also had the opportunity that for those members that had lost their job as a result of COVID, that they were starting to become eligible for an unemployment benefit. So even though during this time from April through to July, the government talked around a new benefit being available for those people that had lost their job because of COVID, we didn't actually see that materialise. But people were able to get what we would call an unemployment benefit if they had lost their job. During that period of time, we then came into August and we had the new pillar passing. How can we do things differently? So across our branches, we're very keen to make sure both our staff and our members interact with us in a safe way. I certainly don't want to have any of my staff catch COVID, and I certainly don't want to be passing COVID through to any members in interactions that we may have with them. So we're certainly very conservative and looked at how are the best ways that we can interact with people. Through that process, our staff have risen to the challenges, and we found new ways and improvements in the way that we can deliver some of these services, such as this. It's quite exciting that we're actually able to go out to almost 600 people that have registered to hear this. Typically in the Stanley, we bring everyone together at major cost to a lot of people, and this is a way that we're able to actually communicate to you, our employer representatives, and some of the members that are actually dialed into this system, dialed in today. So when we think about how we're actually looking and dealing with our members, that health is certainly important, but we haven't forgotten that our main aim is to look after your money and grow your money. And we've continued to look at how we can invest and take care or take opportunities when they do arise. In September and October, we started to see that the government actually passed through the Parliament an act which allowed us to pay a COVID withdrawal benefit. But unfortunately, the final part to an act to actually make it legal is that it needs to be gazetted. We're still waiting for that to occur. So for those people that have lost their jobs as a result of COVID, and we're hoping to get a COVID withdrawal benefit, we haven't been able to pay that to them. But we have been there to be able to pay what we would call the unemployment benefit. They meet those conditions. So part of it, I suspect, is that we're trying to do the best we can, but we also need to make sure we're doing it within the legislative framework that we have. Today, we try our virtual employer conference, and we also continue to talk to our members, and we try and talk to our members in different ways. At the moment in October, we kicked off Super is a long-term investment. A return in 1 year, whilst important, it's not the be-all and end-all. When we think about our investments, we're thinking around investing for people up to 40 years. When someone joins the fund, we hope they stay with us. They join when they're 20, we hope they make it through to retirement at 65. Whilst 1 year adds to those returns, what we need to think about is how we're setting the fund up for long term. And we've started to do a campaign which we'll show you a bit later on through this process. When we move into December, one of the important things for us is that we will go through and we'll look at some of the businesses that we own and some of the properties that we own, and we revalue them. It's one date that we take a snapshot in the fund, and that snapshot builds into the values that we then credit to all members. And what we're seeing at the moment is that we understand that both internationally and in Papua New Guinea, there have been challenges to many of those businesses, which will see a drop in what we would call the valuation. That doesn't mean the businesses has been a poor business. It just means that the circumstances and the income that they've been generating for this particular year may not be as high as what it's been in previous years. And we value each year. So our teams will talk a bit about the impact of valuations and what that means to the fund. So whilst we've been investing and looking at the fund, we continue to look at those long-term opportunities and how we continue to actually build for our members over that long term. In taking a snapshot of 2019, 2019 was both a very challenging year for us, but we actually made something like 504 million kina. That 504 million kina was distributed to the members of the fund. The fund grew, and it grew up to something like 7.7 billion. We also saw something like 30 million saved by our members through voluntary contributions. For those members that left the fund, we're there to make sure they're paid. And we paid out something like 464 million to those members that had actually left the fund. And we crossed that threshold of roughly 200,000 members in the fund. So the fund continued to have a record year when we think about how that fund has actually been performing. When we look at 2020, which we'll come to a bit later, you'll see some of the challenges that have come through in some of those areas. In putting the fund against the funds in the superannuation area, when we look at the performance over the last 5 years to 2019, you'll see there that we generated 504 million in profit. In 2018, we only generated 274. So you can see that there can be some movement in those profit numbers from year to year. Looking back through there, you'll see us have generated 406, 404, 280. The size of the assets that we have means that we should be generating more profit. But I'm also trying to pass across is that there should be some comfort that with the assets that we have and we invest for our members, we pass back that money to members. When you look at the sums there going across, you'll see that we've almost passed something like 1.8 billion in interest to our members. So we've grown our members' accounts by 1.8 interest. Not only has it grown by contributions, but us taking investment steps has actually meant these people have more money for when they retire, more money for when they leave the fund. And that's quite important to actually go through and look at how we do that for our members. Part of the fund is looking at how we continue to be relevant to our members and how we grow them and retain them in the fund. And you'll see that over the years we've been growing the fund quite substantially. In 2019, we actually went through the 200,000 membership. But we have seen slower membership to now. We've seen it slow down to 203 members at the end of September. So when we're thinking about the fund, we are looking at continuing to grow the membership. We want people to come into the fund. Getting the fund larger means that we have lower cost base spread amongst that group of our members. So how we can look at generating better returns and lower costs for members is quite important, and especially for me as CEO for the fund. It's important that we have the right cost base. One of the challenges that we have when we go out and talk to members is always, what are you doing about housing? Housing is quite important for our members, and one of the most important things that someone should be doing when they're thinking about saving for a house or saving for a better retirement is to think of, how am I saving through voluntary contributions? Voluntary contributions is a way of generating more income for retirement. More importantly, for those younger members that are thinking about having a house and are looking at saving for a house, one of the important components is that you'll have a thing called equity. Equity is that amount that the bank will ask you to contribute for the house. Typically, it's a minimum of 10%. So if you want a house that's valued at about 200 to 300,000, that means that you personally need to have saved 20 to 30,000 of your own contributions. Those contributions are available to our members after 5 years. But more importantly, the bank potentially can loan you 9 times that amount. So if you've saved an extra 10,000, that means the bank can possibly loan you up to 90,000. That means our members can potentially get into the house that they're looking for. People talk about house affordability. And whilst there's steps around trying to lower the cost of producing a house, one of the ways for our members to get into a house is actually save, save and save. That saving needs to start when a person joins a company. When a member joins your company as the employer, we'd really like you to talk to them about saving. So those contributions are building up their equity to allow them to get into a house. So for people to get into those houses, house affordability is one component, but saving and getting your financial position into the right state is another way. We talk about financial literacy, And we'll have some of our staff talking today about some of the programs that we run. And we really want our members to understand that connection between saving, getting the loan as maximum as you can based on that amount that you've saved, so you can in fact get the house that you dream of. That's quite important. And what we're trying to do through our voluntary contribution campaigns is get members to focus on contributing and having that opportunity to move into a house sooner. One of the things I'd also like to say to the employers and to the members there is that the fund continues to grow. Net asset growth is a way that we measure the growth in the fund. You'll see here that the fund at the end of 2019 had moved from 6.8 billion to 7.6. At the moment, the fund is something like 8.2 billion. So whilst the fund continues to have contributions coming in, and for us to be there when someone needs the cash to pay them out for withdrawals or for housing advances, there is a certainty that we have the funds available there, and we continue to grow. In fact, you can see there how we've grown from something like 5.1 billion to 7.6 over 5 years. It's testament to the efforts both the employers and our members in saving, but also to our investment teams and for those companies that we've invested into to actually continue to see a source of growth. When we're looking at how the fund has performed with the interest crediting, the interest varies from year to year. And part of the message that we're trying to do today is really come across that, yes, investment returns will vary, and they will vary this year. But what we're wanting people to do is actually invest for the longer term. And whilst these bounce around from one year to the next, we want people to think around, I'm not thinking of just the 1 year, I'm thinking of 40 years. And for those people that are closer to retirement, yes, it's more important, but also to think of, how can I continue to invest past post-retirement? And part of that is to utilise a product called RSA, where you'll continue to get those benefits. One of the things that we see with Papua New Guinea as an economy is that it's very cyclic. What I mean by that is that we have these big ups and downs. And what you want to do is be making sure that you're actually within the investment market to ride through those. And whilst we've seen some of the challenges across the economy with many of the big projects so far not been approved or postponed, sometime in the future these will come live. And when they do come live, we expect that PNG's economy will lift quite substantially. And what we're doing is making sure that we're actually getting ourselves invested for that. We invest for the long term, not just the short term. When we look at the rates across, you'll see there that the rates for the fund is a consistent long-term performance. The 3-year, 5-year, 6-year, 7-year and 10-year are almost the same rates. It's consistently performing. And we've been performing over the 10 years at 7.4%. Over the past 20 years, we have generated 11.3%. And so at the moment, we're seeing that the cycle is probably in a down at the moment. But we know good times will come. And when those good times come, we want to make sure that we're actually invested for you, our members, so that you will get the benefits of that long-term investment. Consistency is important to make sure that all our members are getting those returns over a very long period of time. The other important thing that we do with people is to compare that we're actually generating a return greater than inflation. This means that the money that you put with us will buy more in the future. And this is a way that we look to make sure that when you give us money, you will in fact be able to buy more in the future because the value is increasing. And more importantly, we look at this over that long period of time again. So if you look at the 7 years, you'll see there that we consistently are doing a CPI plus 2%. For this year, we anticipate that the returns will be fluctuating and it will be hard for us to meet the challenges of meeting CPI this year. But when we have the ups and the downs over a long period of time, that average is the important number that will come through. And that's where we're expecting the returns to be for our members. If we look back at 2019, and it seems almost so long ago, part of one of the important things that we saw in 2019 for those members that are former or our current members of the employment of the state, employed by the state, is that the contributions prior to 2009 continue to be paid upon those members leaving the fund. So for those members that have an unfunded, that leave the fund, the state is actually meeting its obligations to make payment to us so we can pay that through to those particular members. For those members that have joined the fund who work for the state prior or post 2009, this has nothing to do with you. For those members that are employed by private companies, unfunded has nothing to do with them. This is for only those members that were working for the state prior to 2009. In 2019, we also had the opportunity to refresh some of our branches, and one in particular was the Kimbe branch that we went through and revitalised. When we think about 2020, we've gone through and looked at some of the other branches, such as the Mount Hagen branch, which was revitalised. And part of the challenges that we've had this year has been looking at how can we go out and revitalise some of the other branches that we intend to. Each year we take a survey of how our members view us. How well is our service? And what we talk about there is a score of 38. That had actually moved up from 35 the previous year. So our members were telling us that service was improving. That doesn't mean that everything that we do is great. There's certainly areas and opportunities for us to look at how we continue to improve our service to members, and we continue to look at those opportunities and work with our teams to look at how can we improve that service delivery to members. Our members are the fund, and we need to make sure they're getting the service that they need. And part of what we look through this Net Promoter Score is that we actually look at how we improve and deliver on that service. In the last 3 days, we got the results for 2020, and we can see again that there is a lift in that measure of our service from our members. And so in 2020, our service results have moved up and are coming through at 42. Part of what the fund does is collect all these small amounts of money from all our members and in the employers. And we gather that money together and we put it to work for our members. Some of the investments we make is in companies such as Paradise, such as SP Brewery. Other things that we invest into is some property. And in 2019, we opened what we call Nambawan Super Plaza. Nambawan Super Plaza are 3 buildings: Deloitte House, Crown Plaza Residences, and the Apex. As well as that, there's retail and there's other office space that's used in that area. We went through and opened those buildings. We then start to receive the rent for people coming in who are using those particular buildings. It's quite an achievement for us to go through, and when we look at the finish in those buildings, the work that many Papua New Guinea people did to deliver on those buildings is quite amazing. As a fund, it's not just about delivering to our members on the returns. Through the fund, we actually create other things in Papua New Guinea that we should be very proud of as fund members. We create assets, we create jobs. In that particular exercise, there was something like 600 people working at one time on those particular buildings. So part of the fund is that when people say, what are you doing? What are you doing in the community? What are you giving back? Part of the fund is that the way that we invest both into the government and through into the private sector is around creation of jobs and further enhancing Papua New Guinea. We saw the growth of the fund that I've talked to, and we saw the numbers of members. We also saw a good uptake in people thinking about when they're actually about to take their money to leave it with Nambawan Super. Leave it with us, and so then it can be utilised to pay you an income going forward. If you've worked for 30 years and you've received a pay every fortnight, all of a sudden you get one pay and there's no more pays coming to you. Wouldn't it be good if you could actually continue to have a pay every fortnight, every month from your super? We can do that for our members. And more importantly, as those assets are left with us, they'll continue to grow. And that's what we're trying to do with the membership, is make sure they understand those choices that they have, where members can in fact leave the money with Nambawan Super and continue to grow their assets and have a happy retirement. Internally, we look at how do we actually create the environment that delivers a sustainable management team. And part of what we've been doing across Nambawan Super has been investing in our leadership program. We've been seeing and we've been passing out some of the new staff that we've brought into the organisation. And one of the things that we're trying to do is lift our capabilities, make sure that we're there to deliver the services that our members are looking for. And for us to do that, we need to deliver that through our leadership programs. So not only are we looking at our members, but also how do we make it sustainable in the organisation. So what's happening in 2020 with investments? One of the things that we've seen over this past 12 months has been that we've seen interest lifting. And one of the challenges, though, is that whilst we've got more money and investing, we're grabbing that interest, we are seeing lower dividends coming through. And what are dividends? Dividends are a reflection of the profit for various organisations of their cash that they want to give back to shareholders. So organisations such as BSP continue to earn profits, but they're flagged and they're looking, and with the challenges that they've had, they've actually paid less back to us as a shareholder. That means we have less to give back to you. That doesn't necessarily mean that BSP isn't a good investment. It just means they're having challenging times. Many organisations in 2020 are having those challenging times, and that is reflected in a lower dividend that's coming through to us. When we think about properties, and certainly part of our property portfolio is that we're seeing more vacancy, less people coming to the country, and so the property income or the rent we expect will be slightly down. We're also seeing that lower expectation and lower revenue that's generated on our assets will mean that our assets will be worth less than what they were previously. When markets pick up, we'd expect that more people come back in, BSP, and people come back into buildings, then we'd expect the assets to increase in value. So this year we're expecting that our gains and losses on assets, there may be some that are flat, but overall we're thinking that some of them will be negative. If we look at foreign exchange, the impact of the currency, because we have some of the assets overseas, foreign exchange, it's probably too early to call. When we think of loans, impairments, which is more of a technical thing that occurred in 2019, we're not expecting this to have any impact really in 2020 with our investments. So it's probably a sideways movement. So what's happening across the fund? Assets with fixed interest returns create that safeguard. We know we get some income from them. Part of our investments is into what we call government securities, into treasury bills and into long-term bonds. We know we get that income, but it comes with a risk. It comes with a risk about the interest rates, and it comes with a risk about those organisations meeting their obligations to pay us that income when it's due. So when we're looking at how this year has gone, we certainly have seen some nice things that are coming through, but there are some challenges. And whilst we have a couple more months to go to see what will incur, I think that if we were asked at this early stage, that the income that we're generating will be lower than what we've done in previous years. Are we going to do this slide? But the fund has continued to grow. When we think of the fund and the return and how the fund has been building, part of that is through the investments. And you can see there the impact of what occurred when the markets actually fell earlier in the year. There was certainly some market instability, and you can see there through that January to April how that impacted us. The fund actually started to drop in asset size. But it's short term. What you then see is that we continue to receive contributions from members, we continue to receive interest income, we've got some dividends, and we continue to see those assets moving up. So part of the important thing for us is that sometimes you have short-term fluctuations, but it's really that long term, what it's actually generating over that period of time. And as I've said, at the end of October, I think we're at something like just under 8.2 billion. So that stability, the growth, yes, it's going to fluctuate, but it's important that we continue to look at that long term and make sure that we're not doing any rash decisions with our investments. Part of trying to get that message across to our members is thinking around how do we go out and talk to our members that super is long term. We want to manage member expectations for what the returns will be for 2020. We don't know exactly what they will be, but our feeling is that they will be lower than 2019. And those returns are actually as a result, typically, of what's been occurring as a result of COVID-19 impacts to some of the organisations that we invest and how they've actually been performing through that period of time. We're also looking at how do we make sure that people understand that super is for long term. And so in the marketplace, you would have seen potentially some ads or some press ads around how these things have actually been trying to be communicated to members. I think part of today's message to you, the employers, is around managing member expectations. It's not necessarily that things have gone incorrectly inside Nambawan Super. It is just a function of what's occurring across the marketplace. So, what's superannuation for? Let's talk about what superannuation is about. Superannuation is really about a period of time in your life when you no longer have formal employment. The concept of superannuation is to make sure that we actually have the funds there for when you're no longer working. As I talked about earlier, typically a teacher will receive a paycheck every fortnight. They'll receive that for many, many years. We look to a teacher to be that skilled individual to look after our children, to educate them. It's our responsibility to look after how can we manage and invest the funds for that person. Do we expect the teachers to be a guru and understand how we're going across the organisation? Can. So part of that messaging is really around getting our members to think about long term. The fund is here over a long period of time. There will be ups and downs in that short period of time. But the purpose of superannuation, and typically when we're talking to everyone else out there who looks at superannuation as a big pot of money, is that this is money for individuals for a time in their life when they no longer have formal employment. We want people to have a happy retirement, to not have to worry about money. And by saving early on and growing those funds means that they can have that happy life and they can utilise those funds for other sessions or other things with their particular family and friends. So what we're looking for here is that it's around that long term. It's a long-term investment where you rely on your own savings to cover your daily expenses. So part of what we're trying to do is make sure that you actually create that wealth for members to enjoy. And so the membership should be looking to how can I actually get the right amount of money? What is the right amount of money? And part of what we're doing through our education is going through that exercise of financial literacy, talking to our members about what's important to save, thinking about your budgets, what short-term needs and what are long-term needs. So part of the importance here that we're trying to get across to our membership is really around what is that purpose of superannuation. It's really around a time in your life when you no longer have formal employment. It's not necessarily about super's all about housing. It's not necessarily super's all about some other idea that the government may have. It's around the time in your life when you're no longer working. But as a fund, we typically have many challenges. And one of the biggest challenges that we've identified with the fund is for us to be able to deliver to our members on many of those particular items that we have. We rely on you, the employer, to look at how we deliver and get information from you. So part of what we're looking for is that we're looking for you to assist us. And what we have on our records is something like out of that 200,000 members, almost 100,000 members do not have their beneficiary recorded. So what does this mean? This means that when someone passes away, it's left up to us as trustee to determine who receives the funds available for that particular person. It's reliant on the executive team to go through and determine who should we be paying the funds to. It's certainly a lot easier when we have a direction from the particular member. This is what I'd like you to do if I was to pass away. Often it takes a lot of time for us to actually go through those situations. Many people have multiple beneficiaries. Often we talk around, is it first wife, second wife? Is there other children involved? What we're looking for is that people to go through almost on an annual cycle to look at who they've nominated and who do they want the funds to go through to. If we think about the fund, that 200,000 members have almost got 40,000 kina each on average. Yet we don't know necessarily who they want us to pay it to if they were to pass away. And unfortunately, people do pass away in PNG, and it's left to us to decide who to pay the funds to. In addition, we have a lot of members that don't have valid dates of birth. We have something like 80,000 members that we don't have their date of birth, and so for us to put them on the system, we put them on as though they've been born almost 120 years ago. Having the date of birth is quite important so we can talk to members when they're nearing or approaching retirement. So we can talk to them about what they need to be getting ready for when they are getting retired. And for younger members, we know that we should be talking to them about saving. So we're asking employers to look at that, providing those details across where we're missing the information. We have invalid addresses. We have members joining the fund prior to joining employment, which shouldn't be possible. We have members with dates of birth after they've joined the fund. Their parents have re-enrolled or enrolled them before they've even been born, which isn't possible. So we have a lot of issues around member data. But what that member data means is that we can make sure if we've got the right data, it actually allows us to lessen the risk of fraud. What we want to do is make sure that when someone comes through to us, that the money is there for them. Their individual money is stored and made appropriate for them, rather than allowing someone else to possibly fraudulently access their funds. And that's what happens by having missing data. Trying to make sure that connection between the employer and the member to provide the fund the right data so that we can make sure that we're paying out the money to the right person or we're talking to the right person about their circumstances. So part of what we're trying to do as a fund is work with the employers to make sure that we can get that data through, and there's certainly some initiatives as to how we can get that data more readily available and more seamlessly transferred through to us. As I said earlier, that Chairman Smari stepped down as chairman and Reg Managi took over in May. At the moment we have 8 directors. Lezieli Tavari left or resigned from the board when she moved into a different role, and so we're currently looking to fill that particular position, and we hope to do that quite soon. In addition, many of the directors, or 3 of the directors, will meet their maximum period of tenure, and that will come through in 2021. So we'll also bid farewell to 3 directors who have served a long time on the fund and have driven us through this success period. So at the moment, the directors, Reg Managi, Anthony Smari, Alan Cam, Lutz Heim, Richard Sinamoy, Karen Gibson, Professor David Covenamore and Professor Albert Mellum are the trustees or the directors of the trustee company oversighting the management of the organisation. And so we continue to work with the directors to position the fund for success into the future. If we think about 2020 and the challenges that we're facing, one of the challenges is always to make sure that we're relevant to the government, to make sure that unpaid public service employer benefits from prior to 2009 are budgeted. We'd made significant progress in 2019, and in 2020 we continue to see the state make payment. There is still something in the order of a total of $2 billion if all public servants were to leave the fund in one day. It's highly unlikely that they would leave, but we are trying to make sure that we continue to be relevant, that the government and the state continues to budget, and that if we do have the opportunity to get full resolution, that would be fantastic for those particular members. PNG this year has seen quite a challenging economic circumstances impact into the country. At the start of the year, we're very hopeful around some of those big projects And towards the year or throughout the year, we've seen some of the other projects go on hold, and we continue to wait for those projects to actually be given the green light. We also have had the impact of the global economy and what's been occurring around the world. And some of those have certainly had impacts into PNG, both in areas such as tourism, but more importantly in areas where our costs and where we're able to invest and to look at how we can actually make money for the fund. So what we're seeing is a challenging time at this point in time. We've seen oil prices, we've seen gas prices be very volatile. That impacts into revenue in PNG, that impacts into organisations into PNG, and ultimately impacts into our members. We certainly continue our push for tax reform. We've been previously talking about, are we taxed too much? We're taxed with salaries and contributions, we're taxed on investment earnings, and members pay tax when they leave the fund. And what we're looking for is really around what is the right tax that should be paid. Obviously, everyone wants to pay less tax, but for PNG as a country, we need to make sure that the right taxes are in place, and how do we go through? So we continue to look and push into areas and push a program where we think that there is opportunities for reform. And we work with both Treasury, the IRC and others to look at how can we actually improve the situation on behalf of our members. At times, there's certainly publicity around the state-owned enterprises and what's occurring with those businesses. There is potentially opportunities for superannuation funds to have a role in those businesses as an investor. But we're also mindful that we need to make sure if we're going into any investment, it meets our criteria. And we have very stringent criteria about that. So please be assured that if we are looking at SOEs, that we will go through a rigorous exercise and make sure it is in for the best interest of our members. Part of the important thing that we're trying to also do is think around, in the superannuation reform, around member housing. As I said, often when we come out and talk to members, they want to know, what are you doing about a house? And what I'm trying to suggest is that we need to think differently. Rather than always looking to super to be the be-all and end-all for everything, that we actually think around opening up and creating a second pie. We talk around super and a house, rather than I need to take money out of super for a house. And in that way, you actually create wealth, not just in super, but you have the wealth of the house. That house is then able to be passed down to future generations or to be sold and can be used as an asset of those people. And part of the important thing that I think around saving for that house is to think differently around what are we doing around our savings culture. And as employers, what role are you playing to assist your employees ultimately to own a house? And how can you best assist those people in there? We do have land, and we currently are going through an exercise that we've been doing for a long period of time. We're trying to protect the assets that we hold at places like 9 Mile and look at how can we assist our members in bringing some of those particular areas on stream as affordable housing and making sure it meets the requirements of the particular council, so it actually meets those having water, sewerage and power, having roads, and not just having settlements, but looking at how are we actually creating a proper house that someone can live in and is an asset that will stand the test of time over long periods of times like 40 years. One of the other challenges we have is the constant interactions that we have with the state in things like the Public Accounts Committee, where we're obviously under scrutiny at times to make sure that what things we do is in fact legitimate and maintaining our level of integrity. It's quite important as an organisation that we have that trust of our employers and our members, and we certainly fight very hard to make sure that our voice is heard and that we aren't brought through the papers as such incorrectly. So what I'd like to do is firstly thank you for your support through the past year. I'd like to thank you for managing the members and also for the work that will be done going forward. We're about to move into a section where we'll talk a bit more around the member and the employer actions and what's been occurring on that side. But certainly as the CEO, for you, the stakeholders invested back into us, we thank you for your support. We'd also like to thank you in advance for the further support as we start to talk about some of the exciting initiatives that we'll do to work with you to improve some of the data areas and part of the education that we're looking forward to doing with your staff. So thank you.